Samuel Hart was born into the dust and struggle of Nyanya, one of Abuja's poorest neighborhoods. From a young age, he was mocked for his ragged clothes and deep faith. In school, his intelligence shone brightly, but so did the jealousy of those around him. His closest friends ridiculed his dreams behind his back. A teacher he trusted once sold his scholarship slot to a wealthier student. Through it all, Samuel kept his heart pure, offering prayers for those who wronged him and tutoring street kids for free. He would often kneel on the dry, cracked earth behind his mother's compound, whispering prayers like, "Lord, if I can't escape this life, use me inside it." People mocked him for his simplicity. He read books by candlelight and memorized scriptures that kept his hope alive. To others he was a nobody, but in heaven a record was being kept. In his early 20s, Samuel fell in love with Grace, a beautiful, kind-hearted nurse who worked at a local health post. They shared late-night talks under the mango tree. They organized food drives for orphans. And together, they led midnight prayers that shook the gates of darkness in Nyanya. Grace often said, "You're not just a man, Samuel. You're a message." But life doesn't always reward the righteous right away. Grace's family didn't approve of Samuel. Her uncle, a wealthy politician, offered her a way out. Marry his business partner's son, David, and never lack anything again. Grace cried. She hesitated. But in the end she chose comfort over calling. Samuel stood at the back of her wedding reception, in the rain, heart bleeding. He didn't curse her. He only whispered, "Lord, let her be happy, even if it's not with me." The years that followed were hard. Samuel struggled to survive, picking up odd jobs and sleeping in uncompleted buildings. One day, a glimmer of hope appeared. He landed an interview with a powerful international NGO. His application had been so compelling that the director flew in from Lagos just to meet him. He shared the news with Emmanuel, his childhood friend, the one he had grown up with, prayed with, shared bread with. "God has done it," Samuel said. "If I get this job, I can finally take Mama out of this place." But Emmanuel's smile didn't reach his eyes. The day of the interview, Samuel never made it. He was arrested that morning, falsely accused of stealing from a local food bank. The evidence? Fake receipts and planted funds traced to his name. He was disgraced, jailed for 2 weeks, and released only after the NGO had moved on. He returned home confused, broken, until he overheard a call. Emmanuel was laughing on the phone. "Yes, sir, I handled it. He won't be a problem anymore. The slot is yours." Samuel stood outside, his soul ripping apart. His own brother. His own friend. He didn't fight. He didn't curse. He just walked away. Weeks later, still reeling from betrayal, Samuel attended a night vigil. The streetlights in Nyanya were dead that night. After the service, he walked home alone. Rain poured. A shadow emerged. It was Emmanuel. No words. Just a flash of metal. A deep, cold stab to the stomach. As Samuel fell, gasping, rain mixing with his blood, Emmanuel whispered, "I'm sorry, but you're too dangerous to be alive." Darkness. Then silence. But heaven had been watching. Samuel's soul did not drift into eternity. Instead, a voice, calm, thunderous, and loving, said, "Your mission is not finished. Your righteousness was recorded. Your pain was not ignored. I'm sending you back." When Samuel opened his eyes, he was lying on silk sheets in a glass-walled mansion in Maitama. His hands were smooth. His body felt different. He rushed to the mirror. The face that stared back wasn't his. It was Michael Kingsley, the billionaire heir who had died 2 days ago in a car crash in London. But Samuel's soul was still intact. All his memories, all his pain, all his prayers, now wrapped in wealth. He blinked. "Lord, what is this?" The voice whispered again. "Restoration." At first it was overwhelming. Private security, vaults of money, 10 luxury cars, and an offshore bank account with more than $500 million, 87 billion Nigerian nairas, 300 million pounds, and 400 million euros. Stocks in tech companies, private jet, real estate in 5 countries. But Samuel, now Michael, didn't rejoice. He wept. Because he knew, this wasn't for comfort. This was for assignment, with wisdom sharpened by pain, and a memory like a blade. Michael began researching his past life. Everyone who had wronged him was still alive. thriving, influential. But they didn't know he was back. He didn't go after them with violence. He went after them with strategy. His first move. He set up the Heart Foundation, a charity organization disguised as a philanthropic mission, but underneath, it was a surgical tool for justice. He hired the best investigators, legal minds, and spiritual warriors. One by one, he traced his betrayers. Not to destroy them, but to dismantle the systems that had protected them. His teacher, the one who sold his scholarship, was now a school principal. Under Michael's hand, the school was audited. Corruption exposed. The man lost his post but gained something unexpected. An anonymous letter with 5 million Nigerian nairas and a Bible. The note read, "Now rebuild. This time with integrity." Emmanuel was now a famous Abuja pastor with thousands of followers. A mansion. A fleet of cars. His church hosted senators. He was known as Prophet Fire. But Michael saw beyond the robes and rings. He saw the blood on Emmanuel's hands. Michael didn't confront him immediately. Instead, he donated 20 million Nigerian nairas anonymously to Emmanuel's church, on one condition: a public audit. Emmanuel, arrogant and blind, accepted. The audit uncovered embezzlement, fake miracles, hidden affairs. The internet exploded. But Michael wasn't done. He visited the church in disguise, sat in the back row, and watched as Emmanuel tried to preach through a storm of shame. Michael whispered a prayer: "Lord, break him, but save him." His next mission was personal grace. He found her, alone and divorced. Her wealthy husband had used her and abandoned her. She now worked in a small clinic, barely surviving. Michael visited as a donor, not revealing who he was. When she saw him, something in her stirred. "Do I know you?" she asked. He smiled. "No. But once you loved a man who deserved better." She cried that night, holding a rose Michael left behind, the same kind Samuel used to give her. From that day, Michael began rebuilding the broken dreams of others. He located all the boys he once tutored in Nyanya, most of them forgotten, addicted, or jailed. He bailed them out, gave them jobs in his foundation, and slowly transformed them into disciplined men. One of them, Bayo, was now heading a nationwide youth mentorship program. The transformation shocked everyone. But Michael knew this was just the beginning. He began purchasing old buildings and abandoned schools in Nyanya and other slums. He poured billions into rebuilding without ever putting his face on a single billboard. "If they see me," he told his staff, "they'll glorify a man. But if they see change, they'll glorify God." Then came the competition. A popular oil magnate known as Obinna White threw a public jab at Michael during a charity gala. "Some people inherited wealth and play angels. Let's see what happens when they face real competition." The room laughed. Michael smiled but said nothing. A week later, Michael quietly bought out 3 of Obinna's companies. Not for revenge, but to save the thousands of workers about to lose their jobs due to Obinna's mismanagement. When asked by the media, he said only one thing: "Wealth is not a weapon. It's a tool. Some use it to oppress, others to heal." The people of Abuja began whispering, "This man is different." But Michael wasn't just different. He was dangerous to darkness. He created scholarships for kids in forgotten villages. He funded investigative journalism to expose corruption. He even began a private intelligence unit that cracked child trafficking rings in northern Nigeria, all while never revealing his true past. But there was one thing he couldn't escape. His heart still longed for closure with Emmanuel. One Sunday, Michael walked into the now half-empty church Emmanuel once led. He sat in the front row. The moment Emmanuel saw him, his mouth froze. He recognized the eyes, the scars, the walk. Michael stood. "I forgive you," he said calmly, "but I won't cover you." Emmanuel fell to his knees, sobbing. Michael knelt beside him. "The blood isn't on your hands anymore. It's on the altar now. Use it well." From that moment, Emmanuel disappeared from public life. Rumors said he went to a remote village and started a prison ministry. Michael never followed up. He had work to do. One afternoon, Michael stood before his board. "We've helped hundreds. Now it's time for thousands." He announced the launch of Heart Tech, Africa's first spiritual and ethical AI think tank. It would help governments create policies based on data, truth, and fairness. Investors lined up. In the first month, it earned $200 million. Michael smiled. The wealth of the wicked has been laid up for the righteous. And now we're using it. But his quiet life didn't stay quiet for long. A journalist named Linda discovered old photos of Samuel Hart. She compared them to Michael Kingsley. The eyes, the scar on the right wrist, the facial bone structure. She reached out for an interview. He agreed. But under one condition, it would air only after he approved the final cut. During the interview, Linda asked directly, "Are you Samuel Hart?" Michael looked at her, smiled, and said, "No. I'm what happens when heaven rewrites your story." The interview aired 3 days later. But instead of exposing him, it inspired a movement. Youth across Africa began calling themselves echoes of the faithful. They started rebuilding schools, mentoring kids, praying in government offices, and funding honest campaigns. The movement spread like wildfire. Michael launched a new arm, Echo Missions, that trained young leaders across the continent. In just 2 years, the foundation had impacted over 40 million lives. One night, he visited the small room where Samuel used to sleep. It was still there, behind his mother's old house. He knelt and wept, not because of pain, but because of grace. "Lord," he whispered, "you didn't just give me another chance. You gave me everyone's." The miracle at the Nyanya Crusade made national headlines. "Billionaire blesses his betrayer," was the headline on newspapers across Africa. Even international media picked it up. But Michael didn't care for the spotlight. He returned to his mansion and fell on his face in prayer. "Lord," he whispered, "I've given. But is this truly enough?" That night he had a vision. In the dream, he stood at the top of Osso Rock, dressed in white, holding a scroll in one hand and a flaming sword in the other. Multitudes stretched across the land, youth, widows, leaders, criminals, all looking up at him. A voice thundered, "Your assignment is not just healing, but rebuilding a nation." Michael woke up with clarity. It wasn't about personal justice anymore. It was about national revival. Michael began holding leadership and morality summits, inviting young politicians, honest police officers, judges, civil servants, and God-fearing entrepreneurs. He funded legal reforms that protected the poor from exploitation. He sponsored 50 honest young Nigerians to run for public office, under a new moral charter called the Integrity Pact. But not everyone celebrated. Some members of the secret cult, the 13 Thrones, tried to blackmail him. Others attempted to freeze his assets through corrupt courts. Still others summoned native doctors to spiritually attack his dreams. Michael stood firm. When the devil fails in the physical, he tries the spiritual. "But I don't pray to defend myself. I pray to dethrone evil." He fasted for 14 days, calling his inner circle into deep warfare. Churches across the country joined in. Something was stirring. Darkness was trembling. A battle was coming. Then came the storm. During one of his live broadcasts, Michael's entire media network was hacked. The screen went black. Then a masked face appeared and said, "Step back, or you will lose everything again." For a second, it seemed like the past had returned. The days of betrayal, of death. But Michael stared directly into the camera and responded live. "I've already lost everything once. You can't threaten a man who's met heaven and hell." He ended the broadcast with a declaration. "I don't fear death. I carry resurrection inside me." That one line shook Nigeria. People began praying across homes, markets, schools. It became a movement, a wave. The poor, the broken, even politicians began asking, "What is this man carrying?" The answer came from every mouth. "He carries God." Then something unprecedented happened. The president of Nigeria invited Michael to a private meeting. No cameras. No press. Just 2 men. The president, a tired old man with failing health, said, "I've ruled this country for years. But I've never seen anyone move people like you, with no army, no guns, no elections." Michael didn't flinch. "Because I don't rule. I serve. The difference is fire." The president took off his glasses. "Nigeria is sick, Michael. And I'm dying. What would you do if you were in my seat?" Michael stared him in the eye and said, "I would heal her. Not with politics, but with purpose." The next morning, a letter was leaked. It was a presidential request, addressed to the National Assembly, nominating Michael Kingsley Hart as Special Envoy for National Transformation and Faith Affairs. A new position, created just for him. Nigeria held its breath. Michael accepted on one condition. I must remain a civilian. I am not here to chase power but to build people. With access to federal systems, he launched Project Nehemiah, a national revival of slums, education, health, and values. Over 150 billion Nigerian nairas in stolen funds were recovered and redirected to hospitals and schools. Former cult members confessed publicly. Former enemies became followers. Churches and mosques joined hands to clean streets, mentor youth, and restore broken families. The man who once died in the rain, alone and forgotten, had become a spiritual architect of a nation's rebirth. Yet Michael knew something deeper. I am not a savior. I'm just a seed. And now the harvest has begun. As the nation watched him, Michael remained humble. He refused bodyguards in public places. He would walk through Nyanya's market with a bottle of water in hand, greeting old women who once ignored him. He visited prisons, not with TV cameras but with food and handwritten letters. He never spoke about his wealth, yet behind the scenes his influence was unmatched. His net worth had soared to over $10 billion. He owned controlling shares in global fintech companies, oil blocks in Ghana, pharmaceutical startups in India, and even a media empire quietly influencing moral content across West Africa. When a rival billionaire mocked him in an interview saying, "Michael is just lucky. He wouldn't last in a real business war," Michael responded in the most unexpected way. He quietly bought out the rival's largest holding company, using a front company, and the next day, gifted it back with a note. Now manage it better. The news stunned the nation. The rival billionaire resigned 2 days later. But Michael's mind wasn't on money. It was on legacy. He created a think tank to raise the next generation of ethical billionaires, teaching them how to steward wealth without worshiping it. He invested in widows, single mothers, and blind scholars. One time, he funded the surgery of 500 children with spinal disorders, quietly without announcement. When the parents begged to thank him publicly, he said only, "Thank God instead. I'm just the courier." The spiritual community across Africa began calling him the king in plain clothes. But Michael never wanted a crown, only impact. And one day impact came knocking in the form of global attention. The United Nations reached out, inviting him to serve as an international advisor on ethical leadership and spiritual governance. They wanted him to speak at the World Peace Summit in Geneva. Michael hesitated, but during prayer he felt a deep tug. The world must hear what Nigeria has seen. Michael arrived in Geneva, Switzerland, greeted by UN officials, journalists, and spiritual leaders. Unlike others, he didn't arrive in a private jet. He came quietly, dressed simply, with just a Bible and one assistant. A reporter asked, "Sir, what do you hope to achieve here?" Michael replied, "To remind broken nations that righteousness still works." His first mission was in Libya, where war-torn communities had lost hope. There, he brokered peace talks between tribal leaders and international NGOs. In one village, after he rebuilt a bombed school, a little girl gave him a wooden cross. "My papa say you look like Jesus," she said shyly. Michael smiled. "No, child. I only work for him." But even as he traveled and healed, back in Nigeria, a familiar danger was rising again. Unknown to Michael, one of his most trusted aides, Chuka, a financial advisor and former street friend, had been siphoning funds from the Hart Foundation. Envious of Michael's influence, Chuka had been leaking internal documents to foreign tabloids, twisting the truth and preparing to collapse Michael's reputation once and for all. His motive? He was just a poor boy like me. Why should he shine alone? Chuka had felt invisible beside Michael's rising star. In secret meetings, he ranted, "I was there when he was nothing. I deserve more than gratitude, I deserve the crown." The betrayal grew deeper when he partnered with foreign entities who hated Michael's spiritual influence. The plan was simple: plant false evidence of fraud, and ruin his credibility across nations. But Michael's discernment was sharp. One night, while praying in his Geneva apartment, he heard it again, that still, quiet whisper. "Look beside you. The snake is not outside." Michael quietly launched an internal audit. Just wisdom. Within 2 days, the forensic team discovered the digital trails, Chuka's secret accounts, coded emails, offshore transactions. The evidence was overwhelming. Michael didn't react with rage. Instead, he invited Chuka to a private dinner in Abuja, acting as though all was normal. Midway through the meal, he slid a folder across the table. Chuka's hands froze as he opened it. Michael looked him in the eye. "Why, Chuka?" Tears welled in Chuka's eyes. "I was tired of being in your shadow. Tired of watching you win while I stayed behind." Michael nodded slowly. "So you chose to become what I was sent to fight?" Chuka cried. "Are you going to jail me?" Michael stood. "No. You'll return the stolen funds, resign quietly, and then I want you to go back to the streets. Serve them until your pride breaks." Chuka fell to his knees. "You still believe in me?" Michael replied. "God believed in me when I was a corpse. I have no right to give up on you." The media caught wind of the scandal, but before any damage was done, Michael held a global live stream. He stood before the world and said, "Even those closest to you may fall, but if your life is built on truth, no betrayal can bury it twice." He then announced a new initiative, the Restoration Room, a safe space for leaders who had failed morally but desired repentance and accountability. Over 3,000 leaders from 27 countries signed up within a week. Former corrupt mayors, pastors, ex-warlords, men and women yearning to be made whole again. The movement spread faster than expected. Some called it the beginning of a spiritual reformation. But Michael wasn't interested in titles. He said, "I'm not building an empire. I'm just watering seeds. God will grow the forest." As Michael prepared to fly to South Sudan, a child ran up to him at the airport. The boy handed him a drawing. It was of a man with two hearts, one golden, one broken. Michael knelt and asked, "What's this, my son?" The boy said, "My teacher said you're the man who came back with two hearts, one for God and one for the people." Michael was quiet. Then he smiled, folded the paper, and said, "Tell your teacher he's right. And that heart still beats." As the plane lifted into the clouds, his assistant asked, "Sir, do you think this will ever end?" Michael looked out the window and replied, "No, because purpose doesn't retire. It only multiplies." South Sudan was a land of dust and dreams. War had broken buildings, but not the spirit of its people. Michael arrived with no convoy, no cameras, just hope. He walked into refugee camps with nothing but a prayer shawl on his shoulders and hands that still trembled when he remembered the streets of Nyanya. One night, he stood before thousands under an open sky. With no microphone, he raised his voice and said, "I was betrayed. I was killed. I was forgotten. But heaven remembered me. And if heaven can remember me, it will remember you too." Cries rose, not of pain but of awakening. That same week, he personally signed a 3 billion Nigerian nairas initiative to build mobile clinics across war-affected zones. When asked why, he simply said, "Because God doesn't invest in people just to bless them, He blesses them to bless others." Back in Nigeria, something unexpected began happening. Bayo, the once barefoot boy Michael had mentored, was becoming a force of change. He cleaned up entire communities with digital solutions, started anti-corruption campaigns that shook local governments, and preached with fire that reminded the people of a younger Samuel Hart. One evening, Michael returned quietly to Abuja to observe him. He sat in the back of a crusade tent, watching as Bayo cried out, "Righteousness is not outdated. It is undefeated." The crowd roared. Michael smiled gently. His assistant asked, "Do you see yourself in him?" Michael shook his head. "No, I see God in him. That's how I know it's time." Michael called for a private dinner with key members of his movement. No press. Just trusted hearts. There, he made an announcement. "I will be stepping away from public life." Gasps filled the room. "I am not quitting," he said with a calm smile. "I am multiplying. The seed has become a forest. Now the trees must grow without always looking for the sun in one man." He named Bayo as his successor, official head of the Heart Global Fellowship and the international face of Project Nehemiah. "But I'm still watching," Michael said with a chuckle. "Like a father who pretends to sleep just to see which child will cover him with a blanket." Laughter filled the room, but so did tears that in his final public broadcast, Michael sat under the same mango tree where he and Grace used to pray back in Nyanya. The camera zoomed in as he said, I died in the rain, stabbed by someone I called brother. I rose in silk sheets, wealthy beyond measure. I forgave the ones who broke me, and I lifted the ones who once laughed at me. Why? Because I was never the story. I was the message. And now you are the echo. That video became the most shared clip in African history, translated into over 20 languages, used in churches, schools, prisons, and leadership conferences globally. But after that night, Michael Kingsley Hart disappeared from public view. No farewell ceremony. No private jet exit. No monument. He simply walked away. Years passed. Some say they saw him in a remote village teaching kids under a tree. Others claimed he was in Israel praying at the Western Wall. A few believed he retired to an old fishing town in Ghana, living quietly among widows and street children. But wherever he was, his legacy continued. Under Bayo's leadership, the Hart movement became a global network for spiritual leadership and governance transformation. Schools named after Samuel Hart opened in over 60 nations. Emmanuel, now a chaplain in prison, spent his final years mentoring criminals into ministers. And Grace, she recovered. She opened a small home for abandoned girls, naming it the Second Chance Shelter. Michael never returned for applause. But every once in a while, a handwritten letter would arrive at a child's doorstep, or a struggling widow would receive an anonymous bank alert. Signed only, still faithful. Because in the end, Samuel Hart wasn't sent back to be rich. He was sent back to echo the faithfulness of God. And he did. 10 years later, the world gathered in Accra, Ghana, for the Global Summit on Moral Governance. Presidents, spiritual leaders, inventors, and youth delegates filled the Golden Auditorium. On the final day, a young boy walked up the stage to speak. He was just 13, a former street child rescued by a hidden donor. He clutched a note in his hand, nervous. Then he opened his mouth and said, I don't know much about politics. I don't know much about business. But I know the man who gave my mother her dignity back. I know the man who paid for my heart surgery when no one else would. I never saw his face. I only got a note every birthday. It always said, God sees you. I see you too. The crowd went silent. Then he pulled out the final note he'd received that morning. This one said, Now it's your turn. Echo well. Tears flooded the hall. Leaders rose to their feet. Because they knew Samuel Hart was still alive. Maybe not in the flesh, but in every child he saved, every leader he raised, every system he cleansed, he lived. And in a quiet village by the coastline of Ghana, an old man sat beneath a palm tree, watching the waves crash against the rocks. A radio played the summit speech softly. He smiled, placed a pen in his worn-out journal, and looked toward the sky. His hair was gray now. His hands trembled more. But his spirit was still fire. A young boy approached him. Grandpa, the boy said, they're talking about you again on the radio. The old man chuckled. Let them talk. Are you really the one they call Echo? The boy asked. The old man didn't answer. He simply handed the boy the journal. Inside were stories, scriptures, maps, prayers, and names. Names of men and women he had helped, loved, forgiven, and prayed for. On the final page, a single sentence was written. I was never born to be known. I was born to make him known. Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, Lord, if this is the end, let it echo forever. And as the sun dipped into the sea, somewhere between eternity and memory, the heavens stood and clapped.